Okay, so we're integrating the furniture design and the commission process in this particular talk here. So I'm going to cover these four things. We start with a design challenge, right? What are we going to build? Collecting data that helps give us information about what we're going to build, and primarily the data from the client and what their wishes are. Then we're going to take that data and we're going to develop a concept. We're going to use a process to kind of decide what we're going to build and to kind of refine what we're going to build. And also to be able to bring something to the client. I don't really want to design something and take it all the way to committing it to paper and to measured plans and to bidding it, and then have a meeting with a client and have them not be particularly happy about what I'm building or want to change it a lot. I've wasted a lot of time. So I like to develop a concept rather than a committed design first, that then I can interact with the client and we can sort of refine that. So creating and refining. Once I go back to the drawing board and take that final data, then I'm going to commit to the design. And that's the point where I want to get the client to sign off on it and the final engineering. And that's the point where after I do that, we go into the shop and start making decisions and then making sawdust, right? And lastly, I want to go over the design details. So you have your overall design. Then what are the little things you can add to it that help to really develop it and make it a richer, more interesting piece? My teacher, Jim Krenov, used to always call those, how do you make the project sing? What do you add to the form itself to give it little details that help make it sing? So this is just an overview of my client meetings. And again, the first thing I need to understand is I need to understand my client a little bit, right? I look at these sort of basic things: age, income, their style, definitely their budget and what they're looking for, okay? And then I describe what our process is gonna be together, okay? So I describe these meetings we're gonna have and what the design process will be. So that initial meeting, which I'm about to go over in the next slide, includes these things: the concept, their space, the style, the existing furniture, their budget, okay? And I explain the process in that first meeting. In the second meeting, that's when I give them concept sketches. I might give them some options with that. And I also like to design on CAD, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. I like to bring them a material sample, and then I give them a rough cost estimate, a spread, and I'm going to talk a little bit more of that as well. So I sit with them then and we look over that design and we refine that design. And then they make a commitment and I get my design fee. Whoops, I get my design fee, and then I go back to, I go back to the shop and I commit things to paper. I give them I go through and comb through my design. I come up with exactly what I want to build for my client. And I do make measured plans. I make a final design on CAD that represents what I'm going to build. And I often make a small scale model. And that's the point where I take the deposit. Fourth meeting is optional. I think as furniture makers, it's really fun for our clients to come and visit when we're mid-process on our project. They just get a kick out of seeing it. I usually do that when I'm dry fitting. All my components have joinery in them and they're more or less shaped, and I'm getting things together to dry fit. They can see the form before it's been glued together or when it's clamped together, what have you. And I think they really enjoy that. And then the final meeting, the delivery and the final payment, which we always like. All right, so let's start with the design, collecting data. So I have a client that wants a piece of furniture. I always want to meet with them in the place that that furniture is going to live. I think it's very, very important to have context, okay? So this environment here, down here, for me is a really important bit of data for how I choose to design something. It's really hard to design. It's not hard, it's easy to design something when you don't have context. But if you design something without that context and you fit it in that room and it's not harmonious. it can really be unsettling. So I like to look at the environment, the architectural style of the building. I'm very influenced by architecture in design. I always have been. And so that's can be very important to me. It might also be important to the client. They might have, for example, a mid-century modern house, and they want the scale and mass of that furniture to reflect that mid-century elevation. I also look at the room and the existing furniture, because it's going to have to live with the existing furniture. And if they want something completely out of their design style, they'll express that. But most of the time they want something that fits within the context of the existing furniture. So up here, when we start with function, of course, how will it be used? Very simple, straightforward. It's a desk, it's a coffee table, it's a dining table. But function, we can add value with customized function. So we have our basic function, but I always want to think through, is there a customized function that could be unique to the client? Okay. So for example, I'm going to build a desk. Okay. And then I meet with my clients and I notice, oh, look, they collect antique ink pens. Okay. So, hey, I see you have a collection of antique ink pens. What if I were to make you a special little area in the desk where you could either display them or store them? If you really relate to the client and get as much data as you can find ways to add value to your design. And it's fun, it's fun to really dive deep into that and do special things for your client. When we talk about form, this is usually where we start design. Okay, so most of us think of the overall form, a coffee table, a dining table, and then we design from that concept. Okay. So we have two things, one called scale and one called mass. All right. So scale, of course, is the measurements, essentially the measurements and how it fits into the space it's going to be in. Sometimes that's specific, like built-ins. Sometimes you need to think about egress. Like if you have a dining table, you have to think about the ability to fit, maybe it's a small dining room. How are you going to fit egress around that dining table? What's the size and shape going to be that might be conducive to that room? That room is square. Great. We got lots of egress around the table. Uh-oh, that room is long and narrow. I'm going to have to build a long and narrow dining table in order to create enough space for it to sit in that room properly. When we talk about mass, and I'm going to show you a slide after this about mass, we talk about mass. To me, that's kind of the expression of the piece of furniture, something that's, like, for example, Mission Arts and Crafts, it's boxy, it's got real squared off components, and it's got a real stance to it. And then we might think of, Louis VIII antiques with curvature to the legs and lots of ornate and more narrow components, and it has a sort of more graceful feeling to it. So when we think about mass, that's what I'm discussing when I talk about mass, okay? And of course, spatial relationships to the room, okay? Now style, that's another approach. A lot of us have spent time building historic reproductions of things, building that shaker table that our client liked or what have you. But we can also interpret traditional styles in different periods in furniture. And sometimes we don't necessarily want to build that exact, early American piece. Maybe it just doesn't turn us on to do that. So we can take that style and we can interpret it. So we can apply our own design aesthetic to that style and maybe give it something fresh and modern, but have it still represent that particular period and also fit with furniture that your client might have that's in that particular style. Yeah, so you can go crazy with that. I had clients that had almost like a villa-like condominium, and the grand room, the rooms were clad in the wall molding like you get in kind of a French or Italian villa, very traditional looking, but they had very modern furniture and very modern taste. So I made an entry table that had cabriole legs and a very curved sort of skirt that kind of represented it, but it was just plain. It didn't have any edge treatments or carving. It was just those forms being expressed. And then on the top, I used clear lucite, clear plastic for the top. And you look through that clear plastic into the drawers, which were open underneath, and I painted them bright red. So you got this crazy modern thing going on, but it's also reflecting this very graceful historic period that the room reflected. Just kind of an idea, just kind of an idea of the ways you can play with design so that you're not constricted simply by the style. Okay. Both. So when I talk to my students about the difference between sketching and drawing, okay, sketching to me is a form of communication. Sketching is a quick representation of a design idea, okay? And so it's a really good tool when you're sitting with your client. It's a great tool for, they're talking about something, you're talking about something, and if you can sketch, you're like, oh, you mean something like this, right? And in real time, you have an image for them to go. And, with your client, you're looking for that head, that head shaking up and down for your data, right? Yes, yes, yes. Then you put that in your data banks and go, they like that. They like that direction. I also use sketching after the first initial meeting to develop the concept as well. Okay. And then a drawing is a more accurate and detailed, refined representation of a design idea that I might use, that might be more literal, that I'm going to show them. And I'll talk more about that in just a sec as well. So that's a great question.
Thank you.
So creativity. So again, you have to get the feeling from the client how they want this piece to relate to the room. So sometimes they have a group of furnishings and they just want it to go into that room and be part of the family, right? Sometimes they want a wow piece. They want you to walk in the room and they want your eye to go to that piece that you made for them right away. It's a good idea to get a sense of that from them, and also from the room, that data again. What is the room like? Could I do an impact piece for this room that would blend with the other things nicely, and would that please the client? So your creativity is a huge part of understanding what your parameters are that you have to build, right? What kind of leeway is that client going to give you? Do I get like the Frank Gehry treatment, or do I have to stick back here in the green and green or whatever? Anyway, so does that make sense to everyone? This group of things here?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here's a kind of an example of relationships of mass, especially here, these two on the left. So we have two cabinets on a stand, the Krenov signature thing, right? So on the left, we have something that is very linear, very boxy, lots of mass to it. Very simple lines, and everything's on the same plane. We don't have overhangs, reveals. But really what we have is spectacular grain graphics. And for me as a woodworker, and I'm guessing for you guys too, wood grain is a really important part of design. It's really, it's what I love in a lot of furniture work. And I really, really like to make sure that those grain graphics are always a considered, if not a front and center part of my design. As you can see with both these pieces, they're spectacular wood. With this one, the spalted maple, you can't really tell, from this photo how spectacular the graphics are there, but they really were. They're a little muddled in the photo, but they were just really, really beautiful. And so I let that be the palette. I didn't have to do a lot of what we call design details or design elements in there, to just let that wood speak for itself. And I wanted something more that had more, strength and modernism to it. Then over here on the right, of course, then we have something that's a little more dancey, a little more elegant. There's tapering to the feet, that sort of anthropomorphic way. The bottom of the legs just bend like a foot, so to speak, a more elegance. So thinking through that mass. Is it going to be a lighter piece, a gentler piece, a more airy piece, or is it going to be something with a little bit more strength to it? Now, the other thing I think about is the relationship of the parts. So one of my signatures I'm known for is creating negative space between my the components or the parts of my furniture, because for me that lightens up mass, and I really like that negative space, and I also like it from a graphic kind of perspective. To me, when I look over here at this piece, the design of the negative space, the open space under the legs, is important to me as the design of the legs. That relationship is important. Over here, you get a real boxy linear thing. Over here, you get this kind of flowing feeling. So I'm looking at the legs, the components themselves, but I'm also looking at how they frame the space underneath and around them. And I can't emphasize to you that if you start looking at things that way, unless you already do, how much that'll affect your sense of design. Because when you go to mock up a leg, you won't just be looking at the leg, you'll be looking at all four legs and that negative space underneath, and how that relates to the piece as a whole, and how it holds up and relates to the box on top. Very important for me, at least, to look at that negative space as well as the positive space or the components. It's also over here, as you can see, how I would, whoopsie, what just happened? How I would break up a large surface. So you can break it up with grain graphics, but I can also lighten this box by putting a little space between the top and the base. If I had no space between the top and the base, it would kind of squish down on top of that box. And I think it would make that box look even more boxy than it does. It still looks kind of boxy. In retrospect, I might have made this middle panel a little bit bigger. But of course, I did use that panel again to break up that space as well. So thinking of design elements to break up large areas that might be somewhat monotonous, even though they might have nice grain graphics, that breaking up the space with some design elements can really lighten up a piece. Okay, and the same with this one up here, having this space in between. This is going to kind of be our model piece as we go through developing the design. So keep that in mind, but this is the finished piece. Any questions about that, those concepts? No? You guys with me? Okay. Okay, so next meeting. I take, whoopsie, hold on. So you guys are kind of in the way of my slides. Hang on just a sec. Yeah, so the second meeting is when I really want to get the yay okay from my client. I want to know that I'm going in the right direction. This is the make it or break it meeting. So I want to sit down with them and show them my concepts. I might give them a couple different ideas, not, maybe a similar piece, but with some different aspects, differentiation. Okay, some different sketches of the same thing done a little bit differently. I don't want to go too far over here and over there. I basically have my basic concept, but I might want to offer them different base designs or different door and drawer configurations or things like that. And so maybe I'll show them some of those development sketches I did. And then I usually, at this point, have an idea kind of what I want to build. So I'll show them a CAD design that I do usually on SketchUp. That's a little bit clearer of a representation of the direction I'm going in, but I'll make sure they know that this isn't set in stone. This is just kind of the feeling. This is kind of what I want to make for you. So I work on that CAD design, and I don't even let myself be set in stone yet. I want to have a strong idea of what I want to build, but still be flexible, because if I'm not flexible, inevitably the client says they want something else, and I got to go back to the drawing board. So we sit down and we start to look at the elements of this concept, and I start to get I start to get feedback from them on what they like and what they don't like. So if there's something they like, but then they say, oh, I love the way that looks, or something they're sure about, they're like, I don't know. And I say, oh, okay, well, what about it? What about it is it that you're not sure about? Well, it looks a little big to me. Okay, well, let's just bring these legs down a little bit then. That sounds good. You know, we go through that back and forth consultation together. It's very, very important to do that with your client. Okay. And I've come up with a rough cost, not a final cost, because I haven't you know, combed through a bid for materials and stuff. And so I give them a range. And this is always a little bit tricky because I haven't sat down and costed materials yet. Okay. And I haven't sat down and done measured drawings. So I haven't called Crosscut and asked them, what's the latest board foot price on curly walnut, you know? And I haven't probably gone through and costed my hardware or anything like that. But I've been doing it long enough that I have a general idea of what I would want to get for a piece of that type. So I'll kind of give them a range. And I want to do this because so many people don't understand what custom handmade furniture costs. And this is why this is the make it or break it, because they thought they could get a handmade you know, credenza for their dining room for the same that they were going to buy that one from Crate and Barrel for, right? And it's really hard because a lot of clients don't really understand the cost. And if they don't have the proper budget for what you want to build, you either have to, you know, not do it, or you have to say, okay, I understand. And then you have to refine it down to that budget, okay? Or you take it and you just eat the loss. Like, there's a lot of different, and we could talk about bidding furniture all night, but we all have our own approaches. So I justify the range by talking about the cost of doors and drawers, the added cost of doors and drawers and design elements and things like that. And this is the point where hopefully we come to Jesus. We've got the and I'm going to now come up with the very final design for you. Okay. But in order to do that, I need a design fee because I'm going to spend a lot of time doing that. I'm going to refine it. I'm going to add design elements. I'm going to design it on CAD, and I'm going to make measured drawings so that I can call around and come up with a really firm bid. And that's time consuming. And so my design fee is, depending on the scope of the project, anywhere from $100 to $500. And that just gives me some money to cover me for that time in case they decide that they can't do it. They decide against it. I haven't wasted all that time. If they bail, it usually doesn't cover the amount of time I've put into it, but at least you get something. And it also helps them to commit to the job. They got a little more buy-in at that point. Okay. Any questions about that? Meeting number 2? No? All right, let's go on to, so this is just an idea of maybe a drawing I might show them or a sketch I might show them. This is the piece you saw earlier in its earlier stages. As you can see, it has a lot more negative space than it ended up with having it around the case there. I closed that up quite a bit on the final concept. That's a good question. I usually talked about interior design students with that because that's a really important aspect in working with interior designers, that you make sure if you're designing the piece that it's your design. And I don't give my designs to anybody. I don't give my measured plans to anybody. Okay, so I keep them with me. Okay, I give them concept CAD drawings, but I never give anyone measured plans, including interior designers. People, I've had it happen too many times where they take that and they shop it to someone for a lesser cost. So yeah, when you're working with interior designers, you have to determine that if you're designing the piece, it's proprietary to you. Sometimes with interior designers, they're the go-between. You don't even get to meet your client, okay? So you're designing for the interior designer, but that's still your design unless they buy it from you. Sometimes the interior designer, you're just a hired gun. They bring plans to you and you build that project, in which case those aren't yours. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
I think so. Another question is, do you price furniture as if it's a work of art?
Yes, I do. That's the work I do. Yeah. Some people have a more utilitarian style. The work they do is simple, easy to assemble. There's a lot of young people doing these kind of really neat, simple, modern, solid wood sort of limited production line things that are pretty nice and they're accessible. That's not my client. My client's pretty high end. So it just really depends on what you're building.
Okay.
And there's both the time materials in there's both your time and materials, but there's also what the market will bear. And you're always comparing and weighing those two things. And there's also your client. Like I have clients that are kind of friends and maybe they don't have quite enough money to build this piece that I want to build for them. And I'm like, I love them. I'll just build, I'm going to do something awesome for them and take a loss. You know, it's each situation's a little bit different. So. Welding, I'm not a welder, a metal worker. So I always subcontract my welding. Yeah. And I've had some glass work that I've subcontracted. Um, one time, a long time ago, I had an interior designer that wanted don't tell anyone, you guys. I had an interior designer what wanted a traditional table with cabriole legs, and I purchased the cabriole legs. They were very nice. They were cherry, very nicely done. This was a long time ago. And I just really wasn't into designing that type of furniture. And so I wasn't unhappy with the legs I got, but shh, don't tell anyone. All right.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, so is that it for questions? So now I've had that third meeting. I'm going to go back into my desk and I'm going to take the revisions that client gave me and our decisions that we made, and I'm going to really dial it in. Okay, I'm going to design what we talked about, making changes. I might even make some changes that I as I develop the design that I think are better, but not so extreme that they would need a change order from the client. And then I start to determine the design details. And I'm going to talk about design details at the end of the talk today. But those are the little things, okay? Hardware, I'll start to consider hardware. I like to make it. I really enjoy it. Not hinges, but like pulls. I really enjoy making those. I'm going to start to think about my materials. And when I go buy my materials, I'm really going to have to consider the grain graphics. And then I'm going to do a very final drawing that's really exactly what I want to make for that client. I do that on CAD so that I can turn it around so we can look at all sides and aspects of it. And I often make a little Barbie doll model. And the reason I do that is because some people just can't see in 2D. They're looking at a computer screen or they're looking at a picture and their brains just don't work. Their brains work in 3D. So if I make a scale model, they can see it in space, and it really helps them to understand the feeling and the look and the scale of that piece. Plus it's fun. They really love the little Barbie doll models. I don't give them to him. I give them to my dad. He's got a whole shelf full of them. Again, it's my proprietary design, but they really do enjoy seeing that little cute little Barbie doll model of their future piece of furniture. So this might be an example of a final drawing. It's so blurry. This was done some time ago. I have a little bit better skills with the SketchUp, but it gives them kind of an idea of what the final piece is going to look like. And then our final meeting, I bring the measured plans. We can look at them. I don't give it to them. They see the final drawing. They see the little model. I bring them a materials sample as close as I can get to what it's going to be. I explain the design, some of the design details I've come up with and the hardware I want to put on it. And hopefully they're all, yeah. And that should be the final step before I go in and really start making that piece. And that's the point at which hopefully we sign the contract and we get a half down deposit. Now, one thing about that contract, I always put a caveat in there. I say all changes are subject to a change order and may require additional cost. So that if you're working in the middle and suddenly they come and say, oh, my spouse wanted another drawer, right? Or something like that. You can say, okay, I can do another drawer, but here's we're gonna have to both sign the change order, and here's the additional cost. That covers your butt a little bit there, but we could also have a whole nother class on contracts. So any questions about this? Both. I have a stash, and if I'm meeting with a client, getting an idea, and I decide that, oh, this would look great in that walnut I have. My stash has gotten a lot smaller because I sort of shifted out of furniture making, but I used to have really a nice collection of woods. And so sometimes I would use that. Also, I have my go-to places. I don't know if anyone goes over to Gobi outside of Portland, the walnut broker. Oh my goodness. I always know I'm going to find my walnut there, and also often some maple. Also amazing walnut veneers. It's just a great place to buy wood, and I really think their prices are good. If anyone's gone up to there to it's called Northwest Woodworking, Louis Judy up there in down there in southern Oregon. His stuff is incredible.
They were on speakers last month. Louis Judy.
Oh, cool. All right. Yeah. No, their wood is primo. Yeah, but I've bought from both those guys, so I always know I'm going to get something good from them. So, okay, so we got it. Here's our little example of maybe one of the little Barbie doll models I might make. Oops, what happened? Okay. And then we get into the shop, and then the pedal meets the metal. We know what we're making, but there's some things we might have to figure out. Mock-ups. So as you can see from this, I often use foam insulation board for full-size mock-ups. It's awesome. It's lightweight. It's easy to cut. It comes in all the standardized dimensions: 3/4, 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1 inch, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 2 inch, I think, something like that. Anyway, it's just a great material to work with. It's not too heavy. You don't have to screw it together. You can glue it or tape it together. And so for certain pieces, particularly chairs and tables, I almost always mock up a piece. For tables, I like to mock up the sit. I want to make sure that the amount of people we want to get around that table accommodates the legs or whatever that base design is. There's a lot of different ways to design table bases other than 4 legs. They can be sculptural, they can be asymmetric, it can be all sorts of different ways, a trestle. But I want to make sure that when all those people are sitting there, that they're not, they don't have to necessarily, sometimes they might have to straddle a leg at Thanksgiving, but for the most part, we have standardized furniture dimensions. I think a good resource for that is Bassett, the mass production company. Bassett has a great document on standardized furniture dimensions. Like, I think it's 23 inches for a table setting area, something like that. Maybe it's less. 18 inches for a chair. It's good to have those standardized dimensions as a pushing off point. Anything standardized is also there to be, those rules are also there to be broken. Okay, so with standardized dimensions, it's a good pushing off point, but sometimes when it comes to customization, you might want to alter those. For example, you have a 6'4" writer who wants you to build a desk. You're not going to use standardized height for 6'4" legs. You're going to want to make them able to be comfortable in that desk. So keep an eye out for those types of things. It's important. We look at design and design trends when we look at sort of like early American furniture. Everything's got a vertical feeling to it, right? It's vertical rooms, vertical chairs. When we go into mid-century modern, everything gets lower and longer. We have these grand rooms, and mid-century, of course, is so influenced by Asian design that everything starts to get a little bit lower and your standardized dimensions lower down a little bit. So pay attention to standardized dimensions when you're getting your data from the room that you're in. Anyway, I digress. So we do a mock-up. We do the mock-up for tables. And you particularly, of course, want to do mock-ups for chairs. If anyone's ever built a chair, you really want to make sure that you have a good sit. With that, you can't use a foam core. You got to use plywood or something. We're primarily with chairs, we're looking at the angle of the back in relation to the tipping up of the seat and how your butt kind of sits in there, and then how that chair supports your lower back. Those are so important when you're designing chairs. So you have to kind of get to the sweet spot with that before you make a commitment and finish your design. Sometimes I'll invite the client to come and experience the mock-up, you know, because it's going to be their piece of furniture and I want to make sure they're comfortable with it. And then we revise those plans. Okay. Then it's time to go buy the wood. I spend a lot of time looking at the wood before I buy it because I'm considering the grain graphics and the color tone. Okay, so if you notice from my work, I use a lot of contrasting woods. I use sometimes 3 different kinds of woods. That the grain graphics and the color tone has to be a pleasing composition. With grain graphics, you can get 2 grain graphics that are really busy and they don't work together, or you can get 2 that do. So I really need to consider grain graphics. To me, that's kind of one of the most front and center aspects of design and woodworking is grain graphics and color tone. So I'll take a lot of time. I also, you know, I also think about things like we know about slip matching and book matching. So for doors, I have to consider that I need a thick enough piece of wood that I'm going to be able to book match or book and slip match. You know, use 2 books on 2 doors, you know, things like that. I got to be able to get my yield to get the grain graphics I'm after. And that can be challenging sometimes. Especially with the wood we might have available to us around here, like crosscut or what have you. Of course, veneering is the solution to that. You can always control your grain graphics with veneering. That's a whole nother thing as well. Yeah, I add an inch to my length, a ½ inch to my widths, and then after I get my whole, so when I'm doing a bid, I'll figure out the board feet, and that's based on rough dimensions, of course. So if I'm going to make 3/4 inch panels, I get my board feet with 1 inch, you know, 1 inch material. And then I add an inch to length, a ½ inch to width, and then I add 15 to 25% on top on the cost on the final. So there's always an added percentage for waste after I've come up with my whole board feet and what that's going to cost. I add about 15% more. 15 to, usually it's around 15 to 20%. On occasion, depending on the wood, I've gone up to 25%, but that gets a little costly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and there's an example of the mock-up I did for this table. I worked really hard on this leg shape. This leg is 4 inches of solid wenge at the top, tapering down. It has a, as you can see here, it has a facet on it. It's a lot of compound, tapering, faceting curves, and they were very, very challenging. They ended up in this table here, which I call the tusk table. It's hard to see from the photo, but this was all really very matched veneer pattern on top and then a solid wenge base. I was heartbroken that the client wanted it stained. The grain graphics of the walnut were just spectacular, and I had the contrast of the wenge base with the lighter grain graphics, and she felt it was too busy, so she wanted it neutralized. And then when I did take it to the finisher, they gave me 2 samples, a darker sample and a lighter sample. I chose the lighter sample and picked it up, and they had done the darker sample, and it just muted out all those beautiful grain graphics. Very heartbreaking, but that's life. I use that design process with this piece. This is the final piece that we came up with. It has massive dovetails that join the edges together here. I had these brackets welded underneath and they're screwed from underneath. The box itself, so I had to join the side together with the top, leave the other side off, put the brackets on, thread the box through the brackets, attach the box on the inside, then glue the other side of the dovetailed side in, and then just add the doors in front. It was kind of a little bit of a chess piece, but I think it turned out okay. Okay, so any questions going on, Bill? We're good?
I think we're good.
All right. So the last thing is really where design, the pedal meets the metal in woodworking design, I think, and that is design details. So when I'm building a piece, even though I've settled on the design, etc., I'm constantly making design decisions and altering things so that I can hopefully add to that piece. So it's a constant evaluation of the evolution of design details, not the whole design itself, just the small things. Now, if there's a large detail that I want to change, I do need to go to the client, and I need to at least get a buy-in from them, if not a change order. But usually the smaller things, like I'm about to talk to you about edge treatments and beveling and things like that, those are decisions I can make independent of the client that are going to really add to the look of that piece. So these are some categories of elements that, so grain graphics always, right? We've discussed that. Reveals and transitions, relationship of dimensions, curves, tapers, grooves, pillowing, facets, and textures. And then one other little bullet point there that didn't get anything. So Krenov, my teacher, the master of reveals and transitions, he really had a way with taking simple designs and adding an extraordinary amount of design elements that when you're looking at the overall piece, it might feel really lovely and you're not sure why. And then you dive deep and you see things like this transition over here. Let's see if I can get that. I don't think I can get that bigger for you, but so we basically have two cases, one case on top of the other. And every element of how one leads into the other has just these little fine details to it. So you can see the side comes down here. There is a slight reveal before it angles down into another bevel and into the other side itself. The transition in front allows the grain graphics of the end grain here, but look how it tapers, and it tapers because the side is convex. And then he's put yet another bevel that also tapers down to a point on top of that. So there's a tremendous amount going on in that one little detail. And that transition is really what makes the piece as a whole. That's kind of, to me, that's where the action is. That's where the eye kind of lands. My cat's meowing, so forgive me. The other thing he talks a lot about is shadow lines, which we sometimes refer to as reveals. So insets and outsets, sticking outs and sticking ins. So even the slightest amount, a 1/16 inch, can really determine the feeling of difference. So let's see if I have an example. Well, if we look at the doors here, okay, we notice the doors aren't flush with the front, right? So they're set back maybe 1/8 inch. And then the edge treatment on this face all around the front has it's not an actual curve, like it's not a round over, it's just a slight curve. It's a slight pillowing. He does a lot of pillowing on his work, and we'll see more examples of that. So, you know, putting some kind of a different edge on something also affects it. You can see down here too, and this is very much a signature of the Krenov style, is when the base and the top are slightly larger than the sides, and the sides inset a little bit. That is such a common Krenov detail, just that little reveal there. Also, you can notice the frame around the top glass is more weighted at the bottom. He made a decision to make that that rail there a little bit weightier so that it sinks that top case onto the bulk of that bottom case. And it helps it to look more integral, I think. Relationships of dimensions. Again, I talked about creating space and thinking of the components of the whole. Like you've got your whole composition, then dividing it up into whatever the predominant components are, the top, the base, and the case in this case. And seeing how those relate to each other and things you can do to affect the transition and that relationship. For me, it's creating a little bit of space, a little bit of lightness to lighten up the box and to lift that piece up a little bit. Here we also have an example of two kinds of woods with super strong grain graphics, but because these grain graphics are so linear, this doesn't read very accurately, this photo, I apologize for that. In the real piece, this isn't so striated, it's much more of one single color, and you can see the ribbons, but not quite that pronounced. It's kind of a lousy picture, sorry. And then the grain graphics of the inset here to kind of break it up. But they're pretty strong grain graphics, but they seem to work. They work better when you see the real piece. That looks a little funny. Relationships of dimensions again. You don't always have to be conventional about the relationship of the parts. There's a series of coffee tables I did where instead of having everything on one plane, I did some asymmetric ones and some symmetric ones where they were on a different plane. This one, function-wise, I liked because people would put their drinks along this lower edge, and then you could display the hors d'oeuvres or what have you, or you could play your card game or what have you on top, and it sort of separated out, you know, the drinks from the food or what have you. And it seemed to function really well. And visually, the stuff looked kind of good on it. I don't know if that's important. But playing around, you know, playing around with elevations, levels, dimensions, so that not everything is conventionally on the same plane. Overhangs also. Overhangs, again, are just kind of like reveals in that how much you decide, for example, on a top to leave from anywhere from a 1/4 inch overhang to a 3-inch overhang really, to me, affects the way the piece reads or looks. In this case, it's an extreme example. It looks like a pair of wings, but it sort of gives you an idea of play around with that. If you have a cabinet with an overhanging top, play around with more overhang or less overhang and see how it looks, see what you like. You might be surprised, maybe a lot of overhang, maybe very little, or maybe not at all. You have to engineer it so that doesn't happen. So I use lifts. Well, how would I explain it? I have a few different ways of doing it. Oversized screw holes is a really good way. With your if you have a transition piece where one is sitting on top of the other, to lift it, oversized screw holes is great because then you can expand and contract. What you don't see on this piece is that these are two pieces, and in the center between the pieces are 1-inch aluminum pipe going along. So when you look at this from the angle, you can see the opening underneath that maple part, and you can see these metal tubes that are holding the two sides together. And then that continues around the waterfall end of the mahogany side too. So the maple on the other end of this table ends at the top, and then the two mahogany size waterfall down as the other legs, and they're joined together by 1-inch aluminum tube. Does that make sense? Because this is about 1¼ inch. So the tubes come in and they go across like that, all the way through the center, boom, boom, boom. And I'm trying to remember how I addressed, I think then these are screwed from underneath, and there's aluminum risers as well along here, and they can move inside the aluminum tube. The screws are smaller, of course, and they can move and expand and contract. Yeah, that's an important point that I talk to my students about, which is how engineering affects design. We all know that wood has its rules and we have to follow them. And so we have to understand, you know, how to design and how to engineer something so that we can follow those rules. And sometimes we have a design idea that we cannot develop because it just really won't work with the laws of whether it's structural, meaning the weight, or whether it's expansion and contraction or things like that. And those two are always at play when we design with wood. Whoops, hold on here. Curves. Curves are a whole frontier that when I went to the Krenov school, I'd been a furniture maker for quite a while, and I wanted to explore curves because I hadn't done any curved work. And this piece here is a culmination of using wiggle wood as a core and veneering on forms in veneer bags. And then also these guys here and here, and the rim around here are all bent laminations. Of course, bent lamination being layering thin pieces of wood so they're flex, gluing them up on a form with glue that doesn't move, and then pulling them off the form and shaping and refining them and integrating them into the piece of furniture so they have the curve that you want. We always deal with spring back a lot, right? And so getting your doors to match the exact curve of your rails with the right reveal, very challenging. But curves are something that can happen in a lot of subtle places if you don't have a necessarily curved piece of furniture. One thing that Krenov does a lot that I like, that I kind of copied on this, is the pillowing. So nothing's a flat surface. Everything has a slight curve to it. All the faces of the rails and the legs have just a slight curve to them. And I'll show you another example of that. Yeah, so this is all bent lamination here. And those are about, oh, they're more than 3/4 inch thick. So you can see right here, I think they're close to an inch thick there. Yeah, so tapers, grooves, facets, and pillowing. These are the little details that can go a long way in adding design interest to your piece. Something as simple as a groove, right? Like you can see here, dividing here. I think this is a great example because there's a groove here. This triangular top to this leg is slightly tilting upwards, okay? This edge treatment bevels in there and in here with a nice taper, right? There's just a lot going on. This little bit of a kind of a transitional curve here is really graceful. Considering those things is really elemental. And I've got another great example here. Little subtle things. Look at that little step there. What an interesting decision, but I think a good one. The pillowing of the surfaces again there. The decision to have this, and this is in the back, mind you, it's not even the front. The decision to have this grain going across this way, I'm not sure how that's resolved in grain in the wood movement aspect, but nevertheless, just a simple little thing like that, and then putting, you know, this isn't just a curve on the edge. It's just it's an angled curve. So a really nice transition, a really nice, simple thing. Textures, another way to go. Textures in materials and textures in wood. This is, and I can never, I'll bet one of you people out there knows the name of this Japanese technique where you burn the wood and then you take a wire brush and you brush it, and it brings out this texture. It blackens the wood and brings out this texture, and then you do massive coats of clear coat, and you get this really neat, really raised grain look. It's absolutely gorgeous. I don't know that that's even a very good example of it, but it really is. I really love the way it looks. The Japanese used it on siding in their homes, on the outdoor siding, because once you burn the siding, it's much more fire resistant. And so they would, and it also looks super cool. And then incorporating other materials, that's another design aspect of a lot of people use metal in their furniture. I really like this perforated. I've used this perforated metal in a lot of different projects. And I really, this was a asymmetric bookshelf for a kitchen with that people had. They had lots of cookbooks. So, and of course I subcontracted, this was all welded for me by someone. So yeah, and I think that's what I got for you guys. Let me get to my stop share. I hope I didn't, wear you all out or put you to sleep or anything, but do you guys have any more concepts, ideas, things to share with me about your own design processes? Or
great presentation.
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, I do this 2 days a week, 4 quarters a year, so at least a version of this. So,
so
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
What's the name of the store down in Portland where you were getting your veneer?
It's called Gobi. It's called Gobi, and it's in the Northwest Industrial District. It's on St. Helens Road. It's a really cool place to go, and it's right down the street from Gilmer. Has anyone ever been to Gilmer? Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
Gilmer is the fine gemstone of wood store. Gilmer sells the top of the top, and they also sell instrument wood. And I'm building guitars now, so I've taken some. So I think we might have, we have Raphael and Heron here. Hi guys, thanks for coming in. If you guys don't mind a little plug, in August, and I didn't put the dates down, maybe Raphael or Heron have them. I'm teaching a 5-day workshop at the Port Townsend School of Woodworking on building a Krenov style cabinet. If anyone's been out there to Port Townsend, it's a blast to go to that town, and I'm so excited about spending 5 days there teaching a class. We're gonna really, ironically, it's a Krenov style cabinet, but what I really want to show people is how to use power tools to achieve the fundamentals of what we need to do, and then use hand tools to refine it. I'm not so much, because I've done this for a living, I'm not so much of a let's spend hours, knocking out mortise and tenon by hand. I'm more like, let's find efficient ways to use power tools to do that. And then let's use hand tools to fit things really perfectly and to do maybe some of our design details. So if anyone's interested, love to have you in that class. It should be a good time. It's going to be the height of summer in Port Townsend, which is a fun town to be in. So
Tahle, just with respect to the point you're making about the use of power tools and hand tools to achieve certain design elements, the pillowing, what was the method typically for creating the pillowing? Was that sanding? Was that planing or routing or?
All of that. There's so many different ways. I did it the hard way when I was in the Krenov school. I used a curved scraper, And I was a lot younger then, and my hands wouldn't be able to do that now. For production people, they would probably use a shaper, some kind of a shaper a cutter head. You can rough curve it with a hand plane and then go back with a scraper or sandpaper. You can make a caul that's curved to put sandpaper on, starting with the roughest to get it where you want it. I generally like to cut and then grind because otherwise I'm just exhausted. So if I was doing it by hand, I would probably, as best I could, equate the slight curve with a hand plane and then go back with a scraper that was in that shape and kind of refine it or hand sand it. That would probably be my approach to the pillowing.
Great. Thank you.
It's pretty exciting to talk to this many people. I appreciate you guys and your attention today. Thanks so much for asking me. I think Bill and Jerry, thank you guys so much for asking me to do this. It's been a lot of fun. And you've also, I have to say, you've contributed to my my development of this course that I'd like to be able to offer to woodworkers at some point in the future. So
well done. Thank you very much.
okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye, guys.